You are listening to By the Book, because if you don't look at the world through the Bible, you will never see it right.
Welcome to By the Book. This is Alan Griffith, your host for episode 79. We've been talking about living in victory, and not enough people are. So many people are struggling with the sorrows and troubles of life, and those sorrows and troubles which come to everybody can be very discouraging and very defeating, but you and I can't live there. You and I have to be able to rise above the heartaches and the troubles and be faithful to our family, faithful to ourselves. Most important, of course, faithful to the Lord. So we've been talking about these things, and we need to live in victory, and we turn to the best place to start to consider the subject, at least in my opinion, and that's the book of Job. And we have spent our last two episodes in chapter 1 of Job, and today we're going to look at just the last verse for a few moments of chapter 1 and then move on into chapter 2. We're not going to deal with the whole book of Job, but we are going to talk about these initial challenges that came to this man and what they did to just almost destroy him, but the devil was not successful. Don't let him be successful in trying to destroy you. So Job chapter 1, we have seen the testimony of Job, a man of God, a great servant of God, faithful to God. He hated evil. He just wanted to live for God. He wanted to care for his people. He wanted to be a man of worship. He wanted his children to walk with God. And then everything he owned was taken from him. His flocks of sheep, his oxen, his she-asses, his camels, his servants, and finally his children. I cannot imagine how I or any one of us who might be sharing this episode today would respond to that kind of loss and devastation. Job is amazing. Verse 20 of chapter 1, and we've already been through it, we're not going to spend a lot of time here, but verse 20 of chapter 1 says, after hearing all of this, then Job arose, rent his mantle, and shaved his head, and fell down upon the ground and worshiped. And then he made this incredible statement, a part of his worship, a part of his testimony. He said this, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. 1 in a million would respond that way. Well, verse 22, which is the last verse of the chapter, says this, in all this, in all that he went through, and his response to it, in all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. Job did not question God's wisdom in this matter. He did not question God's right in this matter. The Lord giveth. Everything you and I have, God has given us. The Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away. And then Job did not question God's love. If God loved me, why would he let this happen? I've heard that statement or similar many, many times. Now, you know, the immediate source of our trouble can be circumstantial and can be people. For Job, it was the Sabians, it was the Chaldeans, it was the lightning, it was the wind, all of those things right out in front, if you will. But I want you to know that anger and bitterness and depression, giving up, giving in, is ultimately a response to God. Job doesn't even mention the Sabians. He doesn't even mention the Chaldeans in all of this. It's certainly doubtful that he had any realization of the devil's involvement in this at this point. But he looked to God, and he did not respond in anger and bitterness. If he had been depressed, if he had thrown in his towel, if he had walked away from God, it would have been a response to the Lord. I see that in many situations. I'm sure you do. People have their problems, whatever they might be, and then there's no worship in their life, no longer attending a good church, no study, evidently, of the scriptures, no prayer, no testimony for God, no seeking of God. I remember one day a lady came to me. She was upset. I don't remember all that happened in her life, but she came to me and she said, "I told God I hate him." I said, "Whoa. Oh my." And I won't go through all the detail, but the time came back where she said she confessed her sin. I want to tell you something. No matter what you and I go through, if we do not turn to God, there is no place to turn. If we don't look to God, there's no place to look for help, for hope. A question I may have asked in the first session on this Living in Victory, but if not, I'll ask it now, and I ask it often. Here's the question. Have you ever been closer to God than you are today? Have you ever been more faithful in worship and church and studying the scriptures, more faithful in prayer, more faithful as a testimony for Christ, more faithful in seeking God, more fervent, more zealous, more of any of those things than today? Well, what happened? What happened? You know, people are dropping away from all churches in record numbers, and certainly people are dropping away from Bible preaching churches in record numbers. What a tragedy. Well, when I look at Job and I get ready to enter the second chapter, I am ready to be stirred and amazed again. We see this incident on a given day. He loses everything, but he continues to walk with God. He continues to be faithful to God, and we're going to see that. But evidently some time passes. The Bible doesn't tell us how much time passes between chapter 1 and chapter 2. Might have only been a few weeks. I envision it may have been months, even a year. I don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us. But think of all he's been through. And then chapter 2 and verse 1 says, and I just dread the reading of it. Again, there was a day. Here's another day. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. That's what we saw back in chapter 1. And then this verse goes on, just like in chapter 1. And Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. So here, the spiritual curtain, as it were, pulled back again. And we are given information, we are given insight that Job was not given. Just like he didn't know anything about the first terrible day of disaster in his life, had no clue what was going to happen. Same thing here. Same thing here. He is back, evidently seeking to live his life, seeking to live for God. Didn't have the wealth that he once had. But here comes Satan to the Lord. Verse 2, just like in chapter 1, the Lord said unto Satan, From whence comest thou? And Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And last time, or 2 times ago, we suggested that that's a parallel to 1 Peter chapter 5 in the New Testament, where we are told of Satan as a roaring lion going about seeking whom he may devour. The devil hates you, the devil hates me, and he's looking for people that he can destroy. And if he can destroy you, he will. If he can destroy me, he will. Thankfully, as we have seen, God puts a hedge around us so that Satan cannot do to us all that he might want to do. And he cannot do anything unless God allows it to happen. And you and I have to realize this to ever get the victory. If God allows it to happen, there is purpose beyond what we can see, but it is not calling into question God's love for us. So amazingly, after all that Job has been through, God responds to Satan in verse 3. And we read this, And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job? And then he gives testimony that Job's life and his testimony for God had not changed from when he had all the wealth that had then been taken away from him. He was the same man, same testimony, same love for God, same service for God. And so here it is, verse 3. The Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth? And here's God's testimony of him. Listen, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil. Satan, you want to destroy people. You want to ruin people. You've had your shot at Job, and you know what? He is still the same man of God. Have you considered him? And then God says something that is critical to this whole issue, this whole matter, whether it be in Job's life or my life. Here it is. Verse 3 goes on. God is speaking. And God says, And still he holdeth fast his integrity, although thou movest me against him to destroy him, listen, without cause. Now what's the testimony here that's so critical? Of Job, God said, he still holdeth fast his integrity. What is his integrity? That is his spiritual character. That is his spiritual testimony, his spiritual commitment to God, his spiritual soundness, his spiritual wholeness. And so here's what God says to Satan. With all that Job has gone through, he has not been changed spiritually, he's still the same man he was at the beginning. Even though he went through all those things, he has not been moved. He's not been moved away from me, God says. And I want you to know that that is the issue of testing. We're going to talk more about testing in the New Testament context. But this is the issue. What does it take to move us away from God? What is it that causes us to have a little bit of doubt, to question his love, to not be faithful anymore? What has perhaps moved you so that you are not now the man, the woman, the young person that you once were for God? When you had zeal and excitement and you wanted to serve God and live for God and you were busy for God, and then something happened, somebody got in the way, something got in the way, and now you are not the same as you were. You've been moved. You don't have the same spiritual integrity that you once had because you've gotten discouraged, you've gotten depressed, you just want to quit. Maybe that's where you are. But here is this testimony of God concerning Job, and I marvel at it. I marvel at it. Still he holdeth fast his integrity. Even though you, Satan, you moved me to go against him, as it were. God allowed it, Satan did it. But he said, your hope, Satan, was to have this man destroyed, and this is so important, without cause. Without cause. Understand today that sometimes God allows the tests and the trials and the heartaches to come into our life without cause. It isn't because of something we did. It isn't because of some way we failed. It isn't because of some sin in our life. Not that that could not happen, but the point is God allows trial, trouble, and heartache into the lives of people who are walking with him. And the test is this: will this person continue to walk with me and serve me, or will the trial and the trouble move him away from me? Well, verse 4, Satan answered the Lord. And when he does, I suggest to you that Satan, this wicked being, so wrapped up in his own pride and selfishness and self-centeredness that he doesn't really understand the human experience. Because here's what Satan said. Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin. Yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. In other words, here's what he's saying. Job was not moved. Job held his integrity because all that he lost, his wealth, his servants, and his children, didn't really match up compared to his concern for his own life. Well, I want to tell you something. I don't think the devil understands human beings very well, because I know some of the things that have happened in our life. I would rather they had happened to me than to someone else. You might feel that way. Satan didn't understand that. Satan is about to say, well, Job doesn't really care about what happened to his wealth and his children. He doesn't really care about that as long as he's okay. And so again, verse 4, Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. Job says again, as long as you leave him alone, it doesn't matter what you take away from him, because he doesn't care that much about those things. And so the devil says this, but put forth thine hand now, and touch his bone and his flesh, You let something go wrong with him personally, and he will curse thee to thy face. The devil's rotten, isn't he? The devil says, again, of Job, he didn't care that much about his wealth and his kids. But if you let him have problems personally to his body, to his health, to his life, you let something happen to him, well, then he's going to turn against you. Well, I tell you, I don't think the devil gets it, because what I'm saying about myself, I think you'd say about yourself. I'd much rather things happen to me than happen to my children or my loved ones. But verse 6, the Lord said unto Satan, behold, he is in thine hand. And then God keeps a part of that hedge up, because he says this, but save his life. In other words, the Lord now gives Satan the liberty to go after Job's body, after Job's health. And Satan was thinking this, now God, if you let me take him down physically, then you'll see that he will curse you to your face. Verse 7, so went Satan forth from the presence of the Lord, and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. Did you ever have a boil? As I recall, I had 2 boils when I was a kid, and I want to tell you something. They were very, very painful. But Job had boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. His whole body covered with boils. This man was sick. This man was hurting. And then, for the first time, we are introduced to Job's wife. I thank the Lord that all women aren't like Job's wife. Verse 9, then said his wife unto him, dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. I would like to have a wife like that, or if you're a lady listening, a husband like that, or if you're a young person, a parent like that. What was she saying? Are you still going to remain faithful to God with all that he has allowed to happen in your life? You're still going to serve him. You're still going to live for him. You're still going to worship him. What's wrong with you? There's something wrong with you. No, there was something wrong with her. She said, curse God and die. She was a tool of the devil. I hate to say it. But she was voicing what the devil was trying to accomplish. There she is, supposed to be his supporter, his friend. And what does she say? Why don't you just curse God and die? Why don't you give up? Why don't you give in? Stop caring about God. Stop praying. Stop serving. Stop doing things that would honor him. And then Job speaks again. I want to tell you, this man had everything going against him. All that he lost, the devil trying to destroy him, and a wife who is joining in on the devil's side. Verse 10. But he said unto her, thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. He didn't call her a fool, but he might as well have, because he said, you're talking like a foolish woman, because she was a foolish woman. He had never charged God foolishly, we saw back in chapter 1, but she is charging God foolishly. She's saying, with all that you've gone through, it's not worth it to serve God. Listen, that's how a lot of people feel today. That's how a lot of people feel today. It's not worth it to serve God. I serve God, and I had a lot of things go wrong in my life, and now I'm not going to serve him anymore. It's not worth it. Well, listen, when you and I look at life that way, we have a very narrow perspective. It is a narrow perspective that views only the circumstances of this life and has no regard for eternity. If you and I don't live this life in light of eternity, we will face defeat after defeat after defeat, and the time will come when we will throw in the towel, to be sure. And a lot of people have. Job said this. He said, "What?" to his wife. "What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God? And shall we not receive evil?" Oh, that's a tough one. That's a tough one to think about. But you know, there are some people who serve God or try to serve God with this in mind. If I serve God, maybe I will get good things. If I serve God, maybe I will get wealthy. If I serve God, maybe I will prosper in all ways. Now listen, the issue of this experience of Job, the issue at the very heart of this matter is this: why do we serve God? That's what it was all about in chapter 1. Why do we serve God? Do we serve God hoping for, expecting good things only? Or do we serve God, listen to it, just because He's God? That was the issue. And what Job was trying to say to his wife is, listen, you don't only serve God because you get good things. Sometimes there are bad things in life. God allows bad things for His purpose. It doesn't mean He doesn't love us. He loves us. It doesn't mean He doesn't care. He cares. And it certainly doesn't mean that God doesn't have the right to do with you or me whatever He wants to do. He does have that right. And you and I need to bow to that. You and I need to submit to that. And so the commentary that goes on as we close out in verse 10 of chapter 2 is this: in all this did not Job sin with his lips. He didn't curse God. He didn't question God. Now, if you know more about the book of Job, you know that he's going to have some friends coming, and they, in essence, are saying this: Job, you know that you have done wrong. You know that you have gotten what you deserve. And they're giving this argument because they don't know God. They don't know what it is to serve God. They are the ones serving, looking for good things. And if they didn't get good things, they would assume that God was then punishing them. Job understood God far better than his quote-unquote friends did. And Job also, and this is so important, we're going to come back to it at other times, Job lived with an eternal perspective. He knew, and it's recorded in his book, he knew that the day was going to come when he would stand before God. Let me read to you from Job chapter 19, verse 25. He said this: I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God, whom I shall see for myself, and mine eyes shall behold, and not another, though my reins be consumed within me. He said, I want to tell you something. The day's coming when I am going to stand before God. And then I want to read to you as we close from James chapter 5, Verses 10 and 11. Our time's going quickly here, but let me just read these to you as we close. James says, "Take my brethren, the prophets, who have spoken in the name of the Lord, for an example of suffering, affliction, and of patience." That term means endurance. Verse 11, "Behold, we count them happy." The term means blessed. We count them blessed which endure. They don't quit. Then he says this, "Ye have heard of the patience," the endurance is the term, "the endurance of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord, that the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy." You know, God understands our struggles, and God has a great heart for us, a great love for us, even when we're going through hard times. The question becomes, will we be moved away from Him in the time of difficulty? Or can we learn by His grace to live in victory? Lord bless you. Till next time.